evidence for our follow-up report. So thank you.
Okay.
Great.
Great. So Larry, should we introduce ourselves before we put the PowerPoint up so that not that seeing us is that exciting, but still, so they can actually see us when we're introducing ourselves. So do you want to go ahead first? Or?
Yeah, thank you, David, and thank you for that overview, Pamela and Rayanne, and thank you all of you for taking the time. It sounds like there's a lot of really great work going on, and that was helpful to hear about what you're doing with ACCJC. So that's interesting, and appreciate hearing that. I mean, not to disappoint Rayanne, but that is a very ambitious sort of overview of what might happen in the next 2 hours. I don't know that we're approaching it necessarily from our view, although it is certainly emanating from our perspectives to the extent that we represent the perspective of the League and the statewide academic senate. I think we try not to view it as this is what Larry and David think, because that wouldn't help you. So for some of you, of course, this will be, some of it will be a review, and there could be utility in that in just informing your ongoing work and conversation. So anyway, Larry Galizio with the League, and we work with the statewide academic senate. We're very proud of this relationship and this collaboration. We don't always agree in Sacramento on bills or in consultation council on particular items, but we do agree very strongly that effective participation, collegial consultation, as identified in Ed Code and articulated in Title V, is, although challenging and not in any way ideal, it's for institutions of higher education, it takes advantage, or at least it seeks to take advantage of all of the intelligence and experience and the myriad perspectives that you have at an institution such as SBCC. And so we think it's really important. So we are always honored to do this work with all of you, and we thank you for taking the time. And yeah, thank you. And David?
Okay, thanks, Larry. I'm David Morse. I see some familiar faces or names here on the participants list, so good to see everybody and all of those that I don't know, but Lori, Sally, Kathy, number of people here that I know. So yeah, I'm David Morse. I was president of the State Academic Senate from 2014 to 16. I was on the executive committee for several years before that, and they've kept me around pretty much ever since for, they find things for me to do, send me out to, do these kinds of visits. I do most of the editing for the Senate on most of the documents that come out, various different things along those lines. And so I've managed to stay involved, and I'm happy to be able to do so. And I'm happy to be here with you. Wish I actually were there with you, but since that's not possible at the moment, this is the next best thing. And want to say thanks to Larry. Yes, I think the cooperation between our organizations, I always felt as state Senate president that of all of the various different organizations, there are some that we work more closely with than others. We probably work as closely with the chief instructional officers as anybody, but I really felt that for impact, probably the relationship with the League was maybe the most important, because if you can get the trustees and the presidents and chancellors and the faculty all on the same page, we're pretty hard to say no to at that point. And we are on the same page. I would say, yeah, Larry said, we don't always agree, but I would say we agree upwards of 90% of the time, actually. We have the same goals. We don't always agree on how to get there, but I think we've had a really great relationship. So we are aware that you had a presentation like this a couple of years ago, as Larry said. So for those of you who were here for that, some of this will be a little bit of reinforcement, but I'm sure not everybody was here for that presentation. And moreover, we don't want this to be the two of us just sitting here talking at you for 2 hours. So there are parts of this presentation that are built in asking for feedback and asking for discussion in certain places, but we're always happy to have questions and that sort of thing as we're going along. So with that, I think we can go ahead and dive in. Let me pull up the PowerPoint. And see if I can get it to go full screen. We'll be all set. There we go. All right. Hope that's working for everybody. So yeah, this is us, and we pretty much just made this introduction. That each college has its own individual situation. So we don't come in trying to tell you this is what you should do, because one of the great things of having 115 colleges spread all over the state is we all do have our own communities, our own systems. And so we can give you what the law says, what Title V says. We can give you good practices in some cases, or maybe in some extreme cases, maybe that's not a great practice. But overall, ultimately, decisions have to be made locally. And although I think that's one of the hard things to struggle with in some cases, I also think it's one of the real strengths of our system. So, Larry, anything else by way of introduction before we jump in?
No, I would just reinforce the fact that one of the primary, well, what's foundational for the league is the significance and the importance of local governance, because you all know your communities and your students better than lawmakers or people in Sacramento. And of course, selfishly, as we advocate for the community colleges in Sacramento, when their local legislators are hearing that there's dysfunction or problems at their local community college, it makes it easier for them to well-intentioned, but make laws that perhaps reduce the ability of local institutions to do what you as professionals know you need to do, and your trustees who are elected locally, they know. So selfishly, we want all of our districts to have really strong local governance, and we protect that. And so this is part of that work. And again, it was really very encouraging to hear the work that you've been taking on, and we recognize it's very difficult work. So thank you. Yeah.
All right. There we go. Okay. So a little bit of background, just a little bit of history at the beginning. Larry, I think you usually take this one. Do you want to?
Yes. So we'll go through 100 years in 2 slides. So don't worry. Although the historians will be angry. So we apologize in advance. But, for our purposes, as we're talking about governance, it's just a reminder of how significant the fact that we emerged from K-12 is. That's one reason we even bring this up. Also, it's important to recognize that California has its own history in terms of community colleges, and that we are very, of course, significant, not just in our own minds, and I think we are quite often, but California has been central to the entire movement of community colleges nationally. So just, when did we begin? Where did we begin? What is our mission? So the next slide.
Just out of curiosity, anybody, especially those.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if you wanted to do that. Go ahead.
Yeah, we've got several slides on the mission coming up, but just out of curiosity, anybody happen to know the answers to those first 2 questions? When and where did the California community colleges begin? And you can't say in California for where, because that would be cheating. So,
although accurate,
yes.
1909, Santa Barbara City College.
Close.
I knew that was going to happen.
Yeah, Larry, do you want the?
Sure.
Yeah, that's just why I didn't ask, because so
Ah.
it is somewhat contested. I think somebody was going to speak. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say it, especially I think it's starting in the 60s where you ended up with a California master plan for higher ed, which is when we really institutionalized community colleges, CSUs and UCs and structured them in a particular way. And I think community colleges were free at that point. So it was a real commitment to higher education across the state and developed, these really impressive university systems.
Absolutely.
No, that's
Doesn't Fresno claim to be one of the first community colleges?
yes. I
Yes.
believe Fresno's where the first classes were actually offered. First community college classes were actually offered. There were several things. Yeah, there are places that'll argue. Chafee argues that they were the first two, but they weren't exactly a community college when they started. So there's kind of definitions in some ways, but generally speaking, we say Fresno was the first one, to actually offer classes as a community college. So, and you are right. Yeah, the separation from K-12, I think it was 1965 when the Board of Governors and kind of the community college system was actually created separate from K-12. If I'm remembering the year on that correctly. So
It might have been 67.
65, so yeah, right in that, yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah, so just right, like all histories, it's contested. What I've read, and we've done some research. In fact, here goes shameless plug number one. The league sees a publishing gap. There's no contemporary history of California community colleges. So David Morse is one of the contributors to a book that is scheduled to come out in the fall that the league has worked on. And we have a publisher in Teachers College Press from Columbia University. So we hoped that to come out in October. So what we found was, you probably have heard that Joliet College in Joliet, Illinois, it is sort of recognized as the first sort of public community college in about 1901, 1902. But in terms of California, as David said, yeah, Chafee, under the sponsorship or collaboration with USC, offered some courses, but it's not really recognized that that was a separate kind of community college. Almost similarly though, Fresno City College is recognized generally as the first California community college offering courses and graduating a cohort in 1910. Santa Barbara is recognized generally as second, I think the year after. So point being, I don't want to get in the middle of that fight, but in 1907, even though in Illinois, they are credited with the first actual institution, Joliet, California was the first state to have, in 1907, public junior colleges actually established in law. So we're the first state where in statute, this idea of kind of the first 2 years of higher education was recognized. So David, did you want to comment further on that?
No, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
And then, and sorry to history professors, and we're just going to skip many significant years: World War I, World War II, the Depression. But just for our purposes today, as Danielle said, 1960 is certainly a very significant period in California and nationally. The master plan, and that really created a basic structure that we still have today. The idea, as you know, whether you like it or not, right? The top 12.5% would go to the University of California, the research institutions for the more scholarly or elite. And then the next third would go to the CSUs, the Cal State, formerly the normal schools, the teachers institutions, and then the rest would go to the community colleges, which, as Danielle said, were free. Actually, the idea with CSUs were also supposed to be tuition free, and they were for a while. And we were, of course, tuition free, or fee free, if we want to use the language that is actually used, up until the early 80s. So yeah, but that was important. But the idea, though, that's very significant is the mission of the California Community Colleges: open access, and also that there was both transfer education, also, as you see, so-called remedial, developmental, or English as a non-native language, non-credit, community service courses, which I know has been really important in the history of places like Santa Barbara. Excuse me. So very significant. Then in the 70s, the term community colleges really was utilized a lot more. Some credit the Truman Commission for really, if not popularizing the term, but really speaking about what were then junior colleges as community colleges. And the Truman Commission work on higher education and democracy is seen as another reason for the utilization of the term community. David?
Yeah, just as Larry said, we could probably do 2 hours on the history, because we've both been so embroiled in putting this book together for about the last 3 years, but we will resist and move on, except that I think there's a question. Is it Guire? Is that correct? Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, hi, it is Guire. Well, I'm happy to hear that. I think there are many of us in the audience who are ready to jump in and look at specific issues that our college is facing. I appreciate the background, but we're hoping we can shift now into the more
Yeah, no,
Yep.
thank you.
Okay, so we do have, again, just one of the important pieces of legislation, AB 1725 Vasconcelos. Again, we had what was the mission, sets up in 1988 these aspects of the mission. I'd just say, if you haven't ever looked at AB 1725, it's worth doing. It's easy to Google AB 1725 Vasconcelos. It's a fascinating piece of legislation because it doesn't read like legislation. So it's really a very interesting read and really a lot of fun to go on with. But I don't think we need to read through this point by point. This is what AB 1725 and 88 set up as our mission. Larry, anything on this before we jump in?
Nope.
Okay. What 1725 did a lot of things. We always talk about it in terms of governance and setting up the governance and decision-making system, which is a lot of what we want to talk about today. Again, it's worth reading because it did a lot of other things: change the funding for the system, set the mission priorities, establish faculty qualifications, minimum qualifications, rather than the credentialing period from the K system from the K-12, set the goal of having 75% of our instruction done by full-time faculty. There was actual funding for professional development, which went away fairly quickly, unfortunately, but the idea was still there. And John Vasconcelos was a huge advocate for diversity and equity. So it's interesting, with a lot of the conversations going on now, because that's a very big emphasis from AB 1725. That was really, as much as anything, more so than the governance and such, Vasconcelos' interest really was equity and inclusion in a lot of ways. And so there's a great deal of that in the legislation too. So, good, Larry? Anything further? Okay. The intent, one of the things to improve the image of community colleges, increase the support for more money, which helped to a degree, and we still need a lot more money for the system. Obviously, we're still unbelievably underfunded. To move us away from the K-12 system, which we started from, and make us more clearly higher education, to move our system closer to the way the universities worked and separate us more from the very top-down system that happens in K-12 typically. Developing a more unified system, institutional renewal. So again, I think we can. And again, just a little further history. The Board of Governors in 2017 approved the Vision for Success, which many of you have seen, I would hope, and looked at. 2020, Board of Governors elects the first African-American president and elects female president and vice president together for the first time. So just a couple of historical notes to mention there. And so some questions here that, again, are probably good to talk about with this. In terms of definitions, anybody want to jump in with how you define what is the definition of participatory governance? What is the definition of shared governance? What's the actual difference between the two? Anybody have a any kind of answer you might want to throw out for that? Not hearing any, not seeing anybody jumping forward. So, okay. Larry, you want to take this one? You want me to?
I will try, Professor. So we've heard over the years, people have very intelligent, cogent responses to this and parsing the distinction. And our point today, if you walk away with anything, is that you can have philosophical conversations about participatory versus shared. However, when it comes to education code in California or Title V, neither term is utilized, neither term is defined, and that the controlling language is a reference to collegial consultation or to consult collegially or effective participation.
Yeah, bottom line, yeah, there is no formal legal definition for either of these terms, so you can argue about them all day. People like to use them a lot. People like one better than the other. They can mean whatever you want them to mean because there is no formal definition. So as Larry said, we tend to push collegial consultation and effective participation as better terms to use in these conversations. So this is a quote from a league paper from, was it 1980 something? Yeah, the 1989. I'm moving things around on my screen so I can actually see it and also see chat and various other things. That college governance is not a simple process to implement. Goodwill, thoughtful people, a willingness to take risks, and an ability to admit problems exist can go far toward establishing a positive environment. The central objective should be a creation of a climate where energy is devoted to solving crucial educational tasks, not to turf battles. And the line of that, the reason I like this slide and the part of it that I always want to point out is the word goodwill there. That you have to go in assuming that we are on the same side and that even if we may be disagreeing in some cases, that we all ultimately are trying to get to the same place and want the same thing. Yes, I know people that that's not always true of. Okay, I've had bad experiences as well with people who maybe weren't acting honestly. But I think if you go in assuming the worst, then you end up getting the worst. And I can remember a particular experience of my own with a former Senate president of my own college many years ago, that whenever we would go into a meeting with administration, before we'd go in, he'd be like, well, I wonder what they're going to pull on us today. Okay, you just don't get anywhere when you go in with that attitude for starters. You have to assume that you're going in the right direction, that you're going in the same direction. Again, it's not always true. But if you don't start with that assumption, I think you're crippling yourself from the beginning. So, Larry, any other thought here?
Yeah, I mean, without trying to, erase reality or erase history or erase relationships, if you walk away today thinking, I'm going to quote Ed Code or Title V to use it as a weapon to hammer my, the other side, then we're certainly not helping you. Impugning the motives of people simply because you disagree with them is not going to work. And so just, I mean, you know, at the end of the day, it comes down to human beings and the relationships. And so that makes it really challenging. But all the ed code in Title V won't do you any good in terms of climate. You'll wind up like Congress at the national level unless there's an attempt, just needs to be an attempt to be, as some say, right, hard on the problems, not on the people.
Okay, so we do have some specific scenarios we want to talk about. This is the first one, and then we'll go back into a little other, a few other things. But we want to have a discussion, and this is one. So we have the document that was created many years ago that we did a revision of. We have kind of some hypothetical scenarios. They're hypothetical. Nobody's talking about your college here necessarily, or any specific college, but just like a little thought from you. And so the scenario here is the college governance structure of the college includes a college council. Different college, most colleges have something like that. Could be different things, could be called different things. With representatives from administration, the academic senate, the faculty union, the classified senate, the associated student organization, all constituencies represented. This council meets with the college president on a monthly basis. In order to promote greater overall collegiality, the college president announces that all newly developed or revised board policies or administrative procedures will now require the approval of the college council before they can be forwarded to the governing board. The academic senate protests that this requirement is not consistent with the definitions of collegial consultation with the academic senate under Title V regulation. Any reaction or thought about that kind of scenario and how you would handle it and what should be done under that circumstance? Patricia, yeah.
Oh, I thought others would raise their hands first. Clearly the academic senate has purview over those academic and professional matters. And to bypass the academic senate on board policies or administrative procedures would be a violation, I think, of Title V. I know they're a violation of something, but the Senate has a clear purview on specific areas. You can't just make a blanket across the board, leave the Senate out of all board policies, particularly in those chapters having to do with academic affairs.
Okay, good, thank you, Patricia. Any other thoughts on this one that anybody might have? Okay. So yeah, this is a pretty common thing. And, in terms of having a council like this, and a council like this can have a lot of, yeah, Robbie, go ahead, please.
I didn't intend to interrupt, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, not at all, please, go ahead.
This is sort of a big issue on our campus right now. We, as Pamela said at the beginning, we've gone through sort of a tumultuous period with changes in leadership. We've had large turnovers in constituencies around the campus, like who is on different committees and in different groups. So there's a lot of change going on, and very often we hear an argument where one side says it is criticizing the other, and the other side says, no, you're attacking us personally. And both sides are entrenched in their points of view, and it often leads to an impasse, because what do we do about that? X needs to change. Well, I'm the person doing X, stop attacking me.
Okay, good. No, appreciate that. Thank you, Rob. Anybody else? Again, I didn't mean to, I maybe started sooner. I should have given another few seconds for anybody else who might want to jump in. So I think the important thing to me, and Larry will have maybe some comments too, get a council like this has a utility, getting everybody together to talk about things. There's nothing inappropriate about having a council like this. But there are also, as Patricia was pointing out, things, and under academic and professional matters, there are things that are supposed to be direct consultation with the academic senate. That doesn't mean they don't get shared with a council like this, because it doesn't say just the Senate makes the decision. Everybody is involved in the discussion. But if an overall council is able to veto the Senate's recommendations, then you've got a problem. Again, in these specific areas. So I think the point is, inclusion is an important thing. Hearing all voices is a good thing. Not all voices are intended to be absolutely weighed the same in all cases. And so there are, if it is something that falls under the Senate's purview, yes, it should be a broader conversation, but in the end, the Senate is, in a little different position on that. Now, not everything falls under the Senate's purview either. And that's an important part of this too, to be willing to recognize that not everything is academic and professional matters. And some places try to make it such. I seriously know of a college where they had an argument over whether the placement of trash cans on campus was an academic and professional matter. Okay, I mean, when you're pushing things to ridiculous points, and you get what you give back. If you're trying to make everything, if the Senate is trying to make everything an academic and professional matter, then the administration's probably going to try to argue that almost nothing is an academic and professional matter, because you're going to get what you give. I think the same sort of thing happens between Senates and unions. If the Senate tries to make everything a Senate issue, not everything is. Some are contract issues. If the union tries to make everything a contract issue, then it's stepping on the Senate. You've got to have respect among the different groups. That doesn't mean there isn't conversation and consultation. But again, different voices are appropriate in different cases. And I see Rayanne wanting to jump in. I do want to say a lot of this, and there's a lot more language in Title V and Ed Code about faculty than about the other constituencies on campus. So a lot of this conversation ends up talking about faculty and administrative roles. But the staff and the students are most certainly important and have roles too. And so we will get to those. But as we look at a scenario like this, I think it is also appropriate to think about what is the appropriate role for the students, what is the appropriate role for staff, and to keep that in mind with all of these as we're going through. Rayanne, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to elaborate a little bit more on what Robbie said and jump off on what, so David, you're aware of me reaching out to you previously as the boondoggle that was the quote, the academic senate owning this idea of non-teaching compensation and having the Senate's role be quite large in that. And part of a recent area of, let's say, contention is that, it wasn't that the Senate wants to make everything ours. I think actually that was historically what we were doing as a Senate. And historically, our union had what's called a thin contract. And so a lot of things on our campus were delegated to the Senate that truly aren't Senate matters. And so in the last few years, we've been trying to undo some of that. So another example other than NTCC is faculty evaluation. Another one would be TLU limits and things like that. And this is an area that's been really difficult for the Senate and the union to navigate. We're having a conversation, I know union members are here, where the Senate is giving all this work to the union. And we're trying to cleanly, define the role of the Senate and the union. And it's been really hard for us as a faculty body and a campus. And so I would just love for you to talk about that a little bit more. Like, where do you see, you mentioned contract issues, like, where do you see the Senate's role in certain things? Where do you see the union's roles in certain things?
Okay. I'll be happy to respond. Larry, did you have anything you wanted to jump in on this slide, gentlemen, before? And I can respond.
No, that's a good meaty question for you to focus on.
I thought you'd think that, yes. Okay. So again, the Senate and the union are both very important organizations. They both have very important roles to play. And it's very important they be playing them together and working together and cooperatively. About the worst situation you can have is the Senate and the union fighting with each other. Not only because it's bad for faculty in general, but because there are other bodies and other constituencies, and I am, saying absolutely nothing about anybody on your campus, But I have certainly seen instances where people were willing to use that kind of disagreement to their own advantage, people outside of faculty. So it's important for the Senate and the union to be working together, but also to respect each other's roles. There are places of overlap. So, for example, yes, Rayanne talked to me about that committee, and I can't tell you about the compensation committee. I can't tell you how that should happen or what you should do with it. Those things are local decisions. I can tell you that, yes, compensation is a union issue. I mean, generally speaking, absolutely. On the other hand, if the compensation is for positions that fall under the Academic Senate's purview, for positions related to curriculum, to professional development, things like that, then certainly the Senate having a voice in what's going on with that also completely makes sense. So that's one where it is touching on both organizations. And that's something to discuss locally for how you for how you want to go about setting it up. I think another important thing to think about with any agreement you're putting together, and I just had this conversation at the State Academic Senate plenary session where we were talking about revising Senate constitutions and bylaws, but contract would kind of fall under this as well. Think about what your approval process is, what having something in any given document is, and what the significance of that would be. As we were talking about constitutions and bylaws, we made the point that in a lot of places, for example, your Senate constitution might be approved by the faculty as a whole, whereas the bylaws might be something the Senate itself can change. Well, that makes something that's in the Constitution a lot harder to change and a lot more permanent. So you might think about which things do you want to make a full faculty decision, which things do you want to make something the Senate itself can deal with. And I'm bringing that up now because putting something into the contract gives a whole different implication to it. Because in the contract, it becomes a negotiation issue that you've got to have a whole different kind of agreement. So there are things you want in the contract. It's protection. It's something that is in your favor to get. But if you put everything in the contract, then you can never actually get anything done. So again, I think those are, I can't say what should be and what shouldn't be in all cases. I think there may be, you brought up evaluations. I think there may be some of the final core aspects of your evaluations that might make sense to have in your contract. There may be some other details that you might want to put into a policy that's a little less difficult to, to adjust if you might want to. So, but I think those are local decisions you have to discuss, but it needs to be a cooperative discussion. And again, one of the things that I think is very important is thinking about what is the significance of having it here versus having it there. What's the significance of having it in the contract? How hard do you want it to be able to, how do you want it to be able to change this language, as opposed to having it in, for example, in board policy, as opposed to being in Senate documents. Again, those are all different levels approved by different people, and thinking about who's going to have control over it is a very important conversation in terms of thinking about what agreements you want to put where. So I don't know if that helps. I hope it gives, just a little bit of thought along some of those issues in terms of those kinds of working relationships. But I think one of the important things with the, with you say the ongoing discussions with the Senate Union is to make certain that they're ongoing, to have something set up so that it's not just that you're talking when there's a problem, so that the Senate and the Union can be discussing on a regular basis, whether it's a monthly basis or whatever, but that you have some kind of liaison body that is set up so that it's not just we have a problem to work out, but so that you're hearing from each other, where each organization knows where the other one is coming from, so that it's not just putting out fires, so that you're creating a good working relationship so that you can get ahead of things and try to think in advance of things and put good agreements in place up front. I don't know if that helps with any of what you were suggesting, Rayanne and Robbie and Patricia, but that's kind of what I have to offer you on it at this moment, just off the top of my head. So Larry, if you
David?
yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to reinforce what I heard you say there. I was thinking about stepping in and saying, I know that we've been talking a lot about our faculty and our Senate and our faculty union and that relationship. We're also really interested in approaches for bringing in more of our classified staff, making sure our students are well heard, our administration, our manager level. But you just did such a great job explaining a good strategy for that faculty to faculty liaison work and relationship building, that I'd love to hear about other ways that that could be a model for some of our other work that we do. That was just such a fluent way to think about how even good, institutional governance practices could play out even between faculty groups. So that was delightful to hear. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. And I will add that I think you can use a similar kind of a model, again, for working with other groups. I know, for example, a lot of places where you may have a student liaison attending and sitting in on Senate meetings. Okay. I don't know very many places where you actually have a Senate liaison sitting in on the students' governance meetings. Why not? Okay, why are you not hearing their discussion so you can bring them back too? I think that, and again, the same thing, you don't want to intrude on other people's discussions by any means. But if this is a cooperative relationship, I wouldn't just show up, for example, at the, whether you have, I don't know if you have a classified Senate or a classified union, whichever the case may be, I would not want as a faculty leader or as an administrator to just show up unannounced at a classified, leadership meeting. But I don't see anything wrong with saying, hey, I'd really like to hear what's going on. Are you comfortable with me coming in for this, and hearing what you're talking about? And I think setting up those kinds of relationships in a positive way that everybody is comfortable with. And again, I think that's important. I've seen conflicts along those lines, but I've also seen people do, again, especially administrators, do exactly that. Not just insert themselves into meetings, but give a call and say, hey, I'm really interested in what you're doing. Is anybody going to have an objection to me coming in? And I think the general answer is probably, yeah, we'd like to have you. So if you go about it right, you can have those kinds of positive relationships. You can have that kind of communication. And again, to me, it's better to get those things going up front so that you can look ahead and say, hey, here's something, let's start thinking about it now, rather than, trying to throw buckets of water on something when the house is burning down. So. Larry, I've been doing a lot of talking. Anything you want to jump in on?
Well, no, as you should, because of the question. It makes a lot of sense, and I thought it was a great answer. And I remember being in Santa Barbara with your predecessor. Well, actually, no, he wasn't your predecessor, but your colleague John Stanskis, when there was the focus really was on that thin contract and what constitutes working conditions. And so it's great to hear that work is ongoing. Of course it's difficult after many years having that kind of an approach. So no, nothing to add immediately, because there's so much to talk about.
Anybody else with anything? Again, I think this is a good conversation. We've got a whole bunch of stuff to go through, but I don't want to cut off what was seemingly an important conversation here too. So any other thoughts? If not, then we'll plow ahead. And I think these next couple of slides were like, okay, the answers to that scenario. So we can probably, so again, if you're interested, I'll just do, Larry did his plug for the book, so I'll do my plug for my scenarios on this. So this document that this scenario comes from, that we started with on the College Council, is something that was created in 1992, right after the passage of AB 1725. And it was created first with a kind of a Q&A. Okay, what does shared governance mean? How do you go about doing this? How do you go about doing that? And then with a list of scenarios like this one, and with each one of them, there's a scenario, there's what the issue is. Okay, here's the legal language, and then here is the kind of process that you might follow and some recommendations for dealing with it. What I love about these scenarios, and I've always loved them since I got involved with the State Academic Senate, is that they are approved by both the State Academic Senate and the Community College League. So this isn't just the faculty perspective. It isn't just an administrative perspective. It's what our leadership sat down and said, this is what we think would be, in an ideal world, the ideal answer to this. Okay. Now, and again, it's been approved by both boards, and then it was updated in 1998. And then about 2 years ago, John Stanskis asked me, because I had been bugging that these should be updated for years and never got a chance to do it because I became State Senate president before I expected to. And so John put me in charge. So we have updated them last year. I finished after consulting all over the state with some of my predecessors and successors as state academic senate president, with chancellors, college presidents, vice presidents from around the state, getting input, getting their suggestions. And last year, both boards approved a revision. We updated some of the scenarios, added about 11 more, including this one on the College Council was one of the new ones. And so I hope that it's a really useful document. And ultimately, you can't say these are the right answers, because all answers depend on your local context. But at least I think they're a really good starting point, and it does give you the legal language on the particular thing. So again, some of the scenarios we've drawn out in this PowerPoint to talk about, they come from that, and you can look for that document. Just put scenarios into the search bar on the ASCCC website, and it's there under local resources and such too. And they might be useful for you for thinking about and for helping to, it may not be exactly your situation, but a lot of them come close enough that there are things that you can use with them. So again, this is just what they end up looking like. So jumping ahead on that. All right. Larry, I have no idea if this is me or if it's you. So I
could give you a little bit of a rest.
Okay, go ahead.
So don't shoot the messengers. We're just providing the Title V language. And as we mentioned before, effective participation. And the language is participating effectively, district and college governance. And perhaps obvious, but needing to be stated that it does not imply complete agreement. And I know a lot of work is done on that's consensus based. The second bullet is a tough one too. I think especially today, when there's a legitimate, important effort to increase participation of students, classified staff, in all kinds of the work that happens at the institution and at the state. Still, the same level of involvement by all is not required. It's not mandated. So I think the previous scenario, one of the challenges, right? We have students who often have amazing, incredible lives where they're working 2 jobs, they have kids, and so sometimes the students and the student voice is not as present as one would hope. There's got to be a legitimate effort to the maximum degree possible to include, but it's not required. And that at the end of the day, the final decisions do rest with the board, right? The way we're constituted. And of course, the board's proxy is the superintendent president in your case. So recommendations for academic and professional matters are to primarily rely or mutually agree upon with the academic senate. However, the final decision does indeed rest with the board. The districts with the most successful governance structures, the boards are almost in the vast majority of cases taking those recommendations of the academic senate. David?
Yeah, so I think an important aspect of this is just, again, that it doesn't imply total agreement. The fact that you don't get what you wanted does not mean nobody was listening to you necessarily. And I think that's an important thing to remember, is ultimately the final decision on this. You discuss the way that things go in different ways, but the final decision, there may be reasons that it can't go exactly the way that a recommendation went. And again, I think there's got to be an appreciation of that. And yeah, the important fact that the final decision, ultimately, all of us are recommending, whether it's faculty, whether it's staff, whether it's students, we're all recommending. The final decisions are with the board that's elected by the community to make those decisions. You can like or not like that. And I have some, kind of philosophical issues with it myself sometimes, but it's the reality in the end. So that's so important to remember, I think. So a few of the things about our governance system that are benefits, we think, getting the expertise and analytical skills of everybody, that's kind of the basis to me of our system. is you play off of the expertise of the people that you have on campus. And the people who are most expert in a particular area, for example, the faculty with academic and professional matters, are the ones whose voice probably carries the most weight. That doesn't mean it's the only voice or that other opinions shouldn't come in, but people have different expertise, and using that expertise and that skill is a part of what the system is based on. Common understanding of why you're doing things, and that's always to me one of the most important things. A couple of you know, again, I am a faculty leader. I've been state academic senate president. I've been faculty advocate for 20 some odd years, but I also spent a year as a vice president of instruction at another college a couple of years ago, and then went back to being faculty. But I have seen the other side of this. And again, I think one of the important things, that I discovered, the more that you let people know why things are happening, a common understanding, even if everybody isn't on board, it still helps with getting people to accept the idea. Commitment to implementation, giving leadership opportunities, giving different people a chance. And you mentioned earlier, I think one of you mentioned always having the same people, at the table. And we can maybe think a little bit about that, and trying to get more people involved. But that's what should be a part of the system, is giving people a chance to step forward, to learn, to move forward in their own careers, but also to help the college through developing their leadership. Promoting trust and cooperation, opportunities for conflict resolution, and again, hopefully less dissent. If, again, the ultimate decision makers are the board, as we said. But if everybody on campus can get together and say, this is what we want to do, then it's a little harder for the board to ignore that voice. So the more that you can get people working together and come to a common recommendation, the more likely it is that the board's going to go the way that you want to with things. So, Danielle, you had a comment.
I think we did this big,
Good timing. Yeah. Go ahead.
Survey a couple of years ago, and of staff and faculty. And one of the real themes that came out of it was a really high level of distrust between faculty and staff and administrators. And so in terms of the structure, yeah, we have all these committees, we have the structure. I know how the structure is supposed to work. We know the board has the final say, but the fundamental struggle we are having is that distrust. And how do we rebuild that? I think it makes it harder that we're all remote, right now. But the reality is, until we somehow get that back, a lot of the things we need to change and a lot of the things we need to do for students just isn't going to happen. And so I guess I would really like to hear, what specifically can we do to try to rebuild that trust? Because it's kind of at the point where, the way you rebuild trust is the administration makes decisions and it seems fair and we trust that, but there's just no trust there. And that's a lot of where the dysfunction is coming. And so I'd like to really focus on that. I don't know how other people feel, but repairing that is really hard and we need help to figure that out.
Sure. Larry, do you have a response, or I could jump in, but
yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Tough. It's a very
so a couple of things. Number one, you don't rebuild it overnight, obviously. I mean, this is a process and this is something that takes time. And so you're going to rebuild trust when people prove themselves to be trustworthy, ultimately. And the more that you can get people to act in a trustworthy manner. And that's not just about trusting administration, because the administration's got to be able to trust the faculty and the staff too, that they are operating honestly. And again, I've seen instances where that wasn't true on for every constituency that we could talk about. I've seen people not necessarily acting honestly. So I think you've got to have everybody being able to trust everybody else ultimately. And that means acting in good conscience, acting openly. Again, I think, one of the best things you can do when decisions are being made, yes, when administration is making a recommendation to the board, if the administration, even if everybody doesn't love the decision, if there can at least be an explanation of why. Okay, why is this happening? Why do we need to do it this way? We know that you don't love this, but here's the reason it's got to be. But again, not necessarily just the administration. There are things that senates do that students don't like. Give the students the explanation for why this is your recommendation. I think in all of those cases, it's important, number one, to be as open, as transparent, and have everybody and the more that you see people acting honestly, the more that trust builds. I think to me, the other thing, and it's really hard to do right now in this environment. So when you're back on campus, this might be a personal hobby horse of my own, but trust comes not just from professional relationships, but from personal relationships. You trust people who you have some faith in individually. And so the more that there can be personal interaction, whether that's through people just getting out and being on campus and talking to each other, whether that is through social activities. I was always big on happy hours myself, but that's a personal sort of thing. But whatever the case may be, again, I remember, some of you know, my former college president is now the chancellor, Eloy Oakley. And I remember when he was our president, and I'm going to say that I felt very different about him as a president than I do right now as a chancellor in some things. We've had more disagreements since he became chancellor. We actually had a pretty good relationship when he was our college president, but there were a lot of people who didn't, who complained a lot about him, who didn't like him much. And my question was always, have you ever talked to him? Have you ever actually been in a room and sat down and had a conversation with him? The people who worked directly with him liked him a whole lot more. And, because again, it's easy to demonize somebody that you don't know. It's easy to distrust somebody that you don't know. So I think the more you can create opportunities for interaction personally, getting to know people, getting to know where they're coming from, the more likely they are to trust you, the more likely you are to trust them. And to me, that's actually a really important part of this. But Larry, I'm going to read the chat. If you have anything you want to jump in on with this.
Well, no, I agree with you that remote does not help. In fact, it might hinder. And that, that distance makes it harder. And I agree with you that humanizing and trying to develop some kind of human understanding of one another and having a drink or whatever that might be, taking a walk is highly valuable. It might sound trite, but we have to model for our students the type of discourse and professionalism and work that we would expect, and we hope that they will demonstrate as well. So, ostensibly, we're all out to help the students and serve the communities. I would just remember, though, that faculty, board members, these are distinct roles and with different pressures. And sometimes the person who's in a particular role or persons, it's not even necessarily their personal view on something. They might just have to do something that they don't necessarily, that's hard to, and this is, I'm not saying doing something unethical. I mean, everyone has to make that choice. But I guess what I'm saying is there are always a lot more, there are pressures that maybe some people don't even understand that exist, that are coming from other constituencies that they also have to try to work with for a longer term. So yeah, it gets back to that transparency and communication and giving people the opportunity and trying to focus on understanding. The other thing is identifying, I would say two more things. One is identifying, are there common areas where you can work together to achieve some kind of success or advance the mission? Even though this becomes contentious sometimes, but sometimes if there's I don't want to say a common enemy, but I will, or there's a bond measure, and if everyone agrees that it's a good idea to go out for the bond, working together can be really helpful. And then the last thing, now I've forgotten what the other one was, but so I'll just stop there.
Okay. And
Great, Larry, we do have somebody with their hand up. I thought we might pull her in.
Right, and I do want to very quickly, though, I see your hand, Beth, and I will go to you next. I do quickly want to respond. Pamela made a comment in the chat, and there have been several comments in the chat, and I can't keep up with all of them. But one that I think is important here that Pamela brought up, and then absolutely we will go to Beth on this. But because the way we're going, we're not going to make it through this PowerPoint. So I think this is an important point to make, before we go. Pamela said, can we make sure there's a space for classified folks to speak? And yes, so by here, you say, is there here in this presentation? Absolutely. We want everybody to participate. But if it's a broader question, again, Title V lays out specific areas for faculty in terms of defining academic and professional matters. It doesn't do that for staff, and it doesn't do it for students. But that doesn't mean it does say that staff and students are to be given the opportunity to participate effectively. And that shouldn't be just lip service. They should be listened to. All of you know, the staff knows more of what's going on a whole lot of things than anybody on campus. That's the reality. I mean, if you've got like secretaries and, in your dean's office, something like that, or administrative assistants, they generally know more of what's going on through there than anybody else in the place. So those voices are important, and they should be included in the conversation. And again, that doesn't mean that they have the same role in decision making, but it means that absolutely they've got important things to say and need to be included and need to be listened to, because they might have answers that aren't occurring because they're seeing things other people aren't. So I think that's a really important thing to bring up, Pamela, and I wanted to make sure that we got it in, because like I said, we're not going to finish the PowerPoint the way we're going, which is okay if this is useful to you. Beth, please go ahead.
Thanks. I am actually a classified staff person, and I have 3 different questions. I'm not sure if I should do them one at a time or if I should just throw them all out there. Do you have a preference?
Throw them out. Maybe we could, we'll see what we can do with them. So sure.
Okay, so following up on what you all were just saying about getting to know people personally, I appreciate that, and I've certainly experienced it to be an effective thing in my own life. But I think as a college, our experience has been that people in the highest positions there's been a lot of turnover among them over the last, I don't know, I want to say 7 to 10 years. So that makes it really hard. It's hard to create personal relationships and good working relationships when people are only there for a short while and then they move on. And my impression is that there are structural things that cause that to be a desirable thing for top administrators to do in California, and that we are in part suffering, not because people get here and they're like, oh, you're horrible, we're moving on, but because there's a culture of churn. And so I'm not sure how to make the get to know people thing work with, if that in fact is true. And so that's what my question is that true? That we just have to live with that?
What's the minimal DE training required? What's the skill
So that's
set?
my first question.
That little checklist that.
And then my second question is that you all were just now talking about an issue in which the Senate has priority, but there is also a shared governance body. And my understanding is that there is a subset of the things that might be discussed at a shared governance body that faculty has primacy on, and that's referred to as 10+1. But I'm not always sure that people know what is 10+1 and what is not 10+1. And I sometimes wonder if they're acting as if something is part of 10+1 when it's really not. And then if you've got a small Venn diagram, then the larger Venn diagram is we also hear people talking about how some things are shared governance decisions and other things are operational decisions. And I often feel like people don't know the difference between those two things. And then that adds an extra layer of complication. So that's my second question. And the third question is a very specific question about the inclusion of classified staff. And we have a situation right now where our shared governance BP acknowledges that staff are meant to be included in decisions that significantly affect them, as it says in Title V. But the areas that everyone there is no agreement as to what areas those are. And in fact, the BP says that those are outlined in Title V and they're not. And so one of the thoughts on the CSCA CCG and has been that what we need to do is we need to have either a board policy or an administrative policy that would actually come out and define that, but we haven't been able to find any examples. So if you know of anybody who's done that, we would be really interested in hearing about that. And those are all my questions. Take them or leave them.
Okay.
I'll step back.
So I'm going to answer the second one first on the 10+1. If we end up getting to continue moving forward, that is actually the next few slides. So I think the next few slides would actually help to address that. On the third one, on the agreement, so again, Title V and Ed Code say that staff will be consulted and will be given the opportunity to participate effectively on things that impact staff. It doesn't really define it a lot more clearly than that. That doesn't mean that you can't define it more clearly locally if you choose to. And I have actually encouraged in places in various, again, including when I was working as an administrator at that other college, I said, there's a list in Title V about these are the areas of faculty purview. There's a list of these areas for students that students have to be consulted on. There is no such list for staff. That doesn't mean that you couldn't think about it. Nothing says you have to, but would be a possibility to work for some kind of agreement locally to say, to define, okay, at least in these areas, these are specific things that staff would be included on. These are, I think, also thinking about your committees and as you're putting together committees around campus. Number one, I think all committees need to have a written charge and a written membership before they do anything to make certain, who's going to be there and what's going to happen with them. I think that's very important. And as you're putting those together, making certain, are we going to have a specific staff member included on this committee? Okay, are we, are there, what, or maybe more than one staff member, depending on the committee. But the point is thinking about that representation. I think you can put those into your agreements, but there isn't much to help you too much in legislation or in Title V or Ed Code, other than that it says, participate effectively. The rest of that is a local discussion. Larry, do you have any comment on the administrative turnover question?
Well, I just want to reinforce what you just said about, I don't know if 4CS or if, Union CSEA or somebody has attempted to create criteria for what constitutes classified staff, areas but just that exercise in itself would be valuable. And I just want to reiterate also you talking about writing things down, because obviously these policies and procedures and how your committees function this is for the long haul, and it's not just for the individuals who are participating now. And even going back, I finally remembered the one element about trust that I failed to mention is, while too much turnover, I'm not talking about the president or something, but in terms of your committee structure, having, some level of succession planning, where you don't just have one person or a small group of people who for very long periods of time are the committee. I mean, that usually creates more problems than it solves. And to have some kind of changing of the guard and turnover, I think can be really valuable. You want to have that institutional memory, but you also have to, leadership opportunities for other people. But in terms of the structure, are there structural means or culture in terms of turnover for administrators? And I'm not sure if you're including a superintendent presidents or CEOs. I think at one level, because we have so many colleges in California, so people who want to live in California, certainly there are myriad opportunities now as the so-called baby boomers are retiring. And a lot of times if a president or a chancellor comes in, they want to have their own and hire their own set of administrators. That's, it's not what you have to do, but that often happens because they want to nurture and work with those. So that creates an incentive. So I don't know, beyond that, but the other thing is California, I would argue for a president or chancellor is the hardest state to be a community college CEO by far. And for a variety of reasons, we don't have time to get into it. And so you do see a lot of turnover in California, and at that level, at the highest level. At the administrative level, a lot of it depends on people's circumstances, but then at the culture and the climate of the institution. I mean, so that, yeah, I don't know what other structural elements there are. If you're paying and compensating people, and the environment is one in which they enjoy it, they should stay. But you do have turnover at the highest level.
Well, and I would say, yeah, so just in terms of that, number one, yes, Larry, I not only agree with you that California is the hardest state for a new president coming into from externally, I'd say not just presidents. I think probably for higher level administrators in general, being a chief business officer coming into California from outside would be murder because of the various regulations and that sort of thing that exist here and nowhere else. So I think it is a hard thing. But I think in terms of the turnover, no, it's by no means just you. I think that's a very common thing all over the place. And again, there could be. Maybe it is, in some cases, a climate thing, people not being happy where they are. But it's also, there are only so many, for positions of advancement, there are only so many opportunities at one college. And if people want to move their careers forward, sometimes they have to go somewhere else. So I think there are reasons for it. But I think that is an argument for bringing people in as quickly as possible. When you do have a new administrator coming in, what are you doing to welcome them, to get them to know people, to get them involved with the college? Most places that I know of, we do new faculty orientation. We don't do much of an orientation for administrators at all, most places. It's kind of, here's your office, do your job sort of thing. And I think something that would allow for, a little more connection in that sense might help to alleviate that problem. But it's not just your problem in that case. I think it's all over.
I'm sorry, David. So we didn't answer the question about Beth's question about operational, right? Some things are identified as being operational. So, I mean, that's one area where you have board CEO relations and challenges. If, the board is supposed to be at the policy level and then the CEO at the operational level. And I know, of course, administrators, as opposed to faculty, there's that whole discussion, well, that's an operational issue and therefore it is under the purview of the administration. And there are levels of ambiguity. And so it's contested everywhere. And so it comes back to relationships and processes that you have in place and that are written down, that are worked on. But there is ambiguity in all of these issues.
Yeah. Grace, I see your hand up. You had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to, I'm a classified employee, and I just wanted to mention, you talk about connection with the administrators, the president. One of the things that our president does and our executive vice president does is they open times where you can meet with them one-on-one. They open up these office hours, and so there's no agenda, and anybody could go in, and whatever topic they want to discuss is, okay. So there is opportunity there to get to know, I think, and I don't know how many people take advantage of that.
Yeah, I think that's great, Grace, and thank you for that. And yeah, I will say, to follow on that real quickly, and then hopefully we can move on here. Yeah, a lot of this is your own personal initiative. How bad do you actually want to? Both for an administrator setting up something like that, I think that's personal initiative, but I think also for you individually. Again, using myself as an example, last Monday I had lunch with my new college, interim college president. I have no role on my campus at this point other than English professor. Okay, I'm just another faculty member. But I talked to him and he said, let's have lunch, and we went and had lunch. I mean, I've done the same thing with our Vice President of Human Resources, because I was on a committee with her and she was coming from outside the system, had some questions about kind of some of the governance structure. I said, I'd be happy to talk with you about that. We went, so I think sometimes you've got to run them down. If you want to get to know people, step out and do so. And I think what Grace is saying, creating opportunities to do that is a really good thing. So Larry, what say we try to shoot through some of these a little bit, because we're going to run out of time otherwise. So a few of these challenges, that one's usually yours. Anything that you wanted to say on that one? Or?
Well, I think, they're at a certain level just sort of obvious. And the second bullet, especially if you're classified staff, what kind of environment do you have? Are you provided the capacity to serve on committees? That's also an important question, and it differs on every campus. And then the last bullet is important. If people disagree with the ultimate decision, quite often there's a critique of the process, whether or not that's warranted. Sometimes it is, sometimes it isn't. I think though you have to just recognize that sometimes the decision is not going to go the way that you and your group, it's just the way it is. So I don't know.
Yeah, no, great. And yeah, I think that I'm glad you point out that time away from other duties, because that applies to everybody. Okay, I did not spend all that time in graduate school so I could come back and sit in a bunch of meetings. I want to be a teacher, but I find them important, so that's true for everybody, but I think it's especially important with the classified staff, as you point out, because in their case, it's not always a choice. I mean, on the one hand, you want the classified staff to be on, in the committees, in the meetings. On the other hand, you can't just close down admissions and records for a couple of hours while people go to a meeting. I mean, they are important where they are. So you do have to make allowances and, set things up in such a way so that the staff are released from their regular duties in such a way that allows them to become involved. I think that's a really important discussion to have. So Ed Code, again, this is the actual Ed Code language. Faculty, staff, and students, the right to participate effectively. Okay. And unfortunately, it doesn't say a lot more than that in some cases about staff. And then the right of academic senates to assume primary responsibility for making recommendations in the area of curriculum and academic standards. And the thing I always like to point out in that is the word both right, but also responsibility. On the one hand, for the academic senate, you have a right to make the recommendations in certain areas. You have a right to a certain role in certain conversations, but you also have a responsibility to show up. It's a little bit like voting. Voting is a right, but if nobody votes, the system doesn't work. So it's not just a right, it is also a responsibility. And if you're not showing up, you can't expect the college to shut down because you didn't choose to play. So I think that's an important one to point out.
Yeah, the other important word for me is recommendations.
Yes, yes. And the ultimate decision in the end is the board's. Absolutely, right.
There was a good point made kind of similarly along these lines in the chat. Do you mind if I just call attention to it?
Oh, please. Yeah.
Someone mentioned, Chelsea mentioned that a lot of us classified are doing a ton of extra uncompensated labor along the lines of equity and anti-racism efforts, along with committee work. It's demoralizing. Can you speak to that a little bit? Because that is part of the structural things that we can change to uplift staff on campus.
A little bit, and probably only a little bit in that, because again, the compensation thing is something that does have to be worked out locally. Absolutely. But but it is extra work. And that's true for the part-time faculty as well, by the way. And the inclusion of the part-timers, that they are, but yes, you want them involved, but full-time faculty are compensated in a different way, and you need to make certain that part-timers are being taken care of too. So that applies to classified. I think that applies to part-time faculty. I think that's a broad question that is important to think about. And each college needs to take that into consideration. Again, you want to have people involved. On the one hand, it's for the good of the college. It's for the good of the students, which all of us are here for. On the other hand, it is a little offensive to ask people to work for free, and to do a bunch of extra stuff for free. So, but we are also, as we said at the beginning, an incredibly underfunded system to begin with. So you've got to balance one thing with another. And I think that is a very important question to discuss in terms of not only making certain that those opportunities are available for part-time faculty, for staff, for students, and again, always for full-time faculty to fulfill their role, but also that people are being treated fairly in terms of what you're asking them to do and how they're being compensated to do it. So, Larry, do you have anything additional on that one, or that's a tough one?
I just saw Patricia has a question.
Yes, Patricia.
Or a point.
Yeah, I wanted to let everybody know that in the Standard 4 Integrated Improvement Plan, which my classified colleagues helped to write, we have two very specific items that refer to the things we're talking about. One is that we actually create a local board policy that tries to better define those areas that our classified professionals would have a direct primacy over or be involved with. So what we talked about before, we actually list that as something we want to do. The second thing is what Chelsea just brought up. We also bring up the fact that we cannot have more inclusion if we have one class of employees that are paid for it via our contract, that's faculty, and we have another group that gets no compensation, and yet we really want them at the table. We have a third group, which is students, which is challenging at a whole different level. The reason I bring this up, folks, is that Ray, as Senate president, and but all of our constituency groups are now doing outreach for the task force that's going to be overseeing how we carry out the Standard 4 Improvement Plan. This is where the rubber hits the road. You know, we listed certain aspirational things we really want to do because these problems were identified. And now we're forming the group that's going to make sure that we take specific action in order to be able to achieve those things. So the improvement plan is pretty aspirational in nature. And now we're approaching the point where we got to figure out exactly how to do this. So thank you.
Yeah. And I would say, first of all, if you manage to achieve that board policy regarding classified roles, I'd love to have somebody send it to me because I think that would be really useful. Because, yeah, the question that Beth asked earlier, do you have an example? No, I've talked about it all over the place, but I don't. I haven't seen anybody. So if you could achieve that, I think we'd love to have it.
Yep.
And just secondly, out of fairness, again, everything you said, I completely agree with. So I'm by no means debating anything. I do also want to be fair. I have never discussed this with Pamela, so I am not speaking for her, but I could just imagine her sitting there thinking, I agree with all of that, but it's not that simple because somebody's got to pay for it. So it's not, I mean, you know, there does have to be the consideration. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't have the conversation or you shouldn't try to find a way to do it. It means that it's not always as easy as it sounds. That's all. And I think we want to be fair on that too. Sally, hi, Sally, go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, good to see you. And thank you for this presentation. This is great. And actually, right when I was clicking on raising my hand, you brought it up, but I just want to sort of piggyback on the fact that one of the challenges, and this was in one of your slides, that bringing faculty together and everybody together to the table is that it's not a level playing field because of, like the staff member brought up, and part-time faculty. One group that's really has a hard time being represented is not only part-time faculty, but non-credit, which is in Santa Barbara City College is all 99.9% part-time. So for a variety of reasons, it's hard for, which we won't go into, for a part-time faculty member to want to do it. Just saying, well, here's the opportunity, you can be on this board and you can do this. Just making sure that they know about it, that's great, and telling them about it, but that's not the same thing as providing support. And if we really want true shared participatory governments, there needs to be support for these people, whether it's staff or part-time faculty, especially, again, non-credit, because you don't just tell a student, yeah, you can go to Yale, you can go to ECSB. You have to provide support, to make it a little more of a level playing field. So I really appreciate that you brought that up, except you stole my thunder that I wanted to ask about that. And if you have any We all know the budget constraints, but we're also very tired of hearing that and saying, sorry, we want shared governance and all the constituents to be at the table, but we just don't have the money. Well, you know what? Find it. I mean, it needs to, if we really want this to be true, then support the people so that they can sit at the table and be part of the discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, and I only have, I mean, so one partial thing that just is relevant to what you just brought up. Yeah, for the non-credit faculty, that's a structural issue, because that's true almost everywhere. Non-credit are almost always part-time because non-credit faculty don't count in the faculty obligation number. And I've been railing about that at the state level for several years now. So I think there are some of these are caused by some of the laws, some of the ways that the system is set up, you know, along those lines. But your general point in terms of that inclusion, yeah, and again, it's the fact that this is difficult doesn't mean the discussion shouldn't happen or that you shouldn't look for the money to do it. But again, I think you also do have to take into consideration that resources are finite. You know, I mean, you know, there is, and sooner or later you do this, you've got to not do something else, and there are choices to be made in all of those cases. But that doesn't make what you're bringing up any less legitimate, most certainly. So.
Yeah, and this may be happening at Princeton, but it's less likely. Well, that brings up a whole different set of questions. But the bottom line is, unfortunately, yeah, I agreed. Let's find the money. Let's put your money where your mouth is, and let's actually have effective participation and give classified the opportunity. At the same time, competing with that, or at least affecting that, is, I don't know what your college budget is, and I don't know how much you pay for your outstanding pension obligations, you know, PERS, and what part of your budget is going toward that. You know, all of our institutions, save perhaps for some of the so-called basic aid institutions, and even some of, you know, even them, really struggle financially, and really do. And it's just a challenge, and it's very frustrating. And we try to do the best we can, David, myself, and our colleagues who lobby and advocate, as you do locally, to try to increase that dollar amount.
So again, just quickly here, this is the reason that we say that we prefer consult collegially over shared governance or participatory governance, because there is an actual definition for consult collegially, at least in the terms of faculty, which means either that the board will rely primarily on the judgment of the academic senate. Now that says primarily, and the final decision is still with the board. But the implication there is that under normal circumstances, the Senate makes the recommendation, hopefully after consultation with the other constituencies on campus, but the Senate makes the recommendation, and except for in extreme circumstances, the board accepts that. Or mutual agreement where the board designee and the representatives of the Senate, again, with appropriate input from the other constituencies on campus, they should not be left out of this, are coming to an agreement between the two of them, and nothing changes until that agreement is actually reached. So there's an actual definition for what consult collegially means. And Larry, I'm going to skip through the kind of questions on this, if that's okay to try to, yeah. So, okay. So I think we already just covered that, what mutual agreement means. Okay, so the question Beth asked, what are academic and professional matters? First, the actual list in Title V. Degree and certificate requirements, curriculum, grading policies, educational program development, standards and policies regarding student preparation and success, which is pretty much where your student services fall under for the most part, is that number 5. And then district and college governance structures as related to faculty roles and accreditation, policies for professional development, processes for program review, processes for institutional planning and budget development. Now, an important difference on this, if I can get this to go backwards, notice something. These first few are the actual requirements, degree and certificate requirements, curriculum, grading policies. It's kind of all-inclusive in those areas. Then you look at these, and it says policies for professional development. That doesn't mean your academic senate gets to decide all academic professional or all professional development activities. It says the policies, and you can still have those delegated to another body. It says processes for institutional planning and budget development. That doesn't mean that the academic senate has a line item sign off on the budget. It means that the Senate is consulted on the process through which the budget is developed. So again, maybe setting the priorities, something like that. But the operational part is still the actual line by line budget assignment. So again, there is a difference in these different things. And I think number one, it's important to notice which ones say policies or processes and which ones say this whole thing is actually the Senate's purview. And then the idea out of those 10 areas is each college locally or each district decides which ones you're going to primarily rely, meaning the Senate makes the recommendation, and which ones are mutually agree, meaning you work together to come to an agreement on that. And you can decide that locally, which, and all colleges have different, what's covered in educational program development. Again, probably the, I saw a question in the chat on that. For educational program development, again, part of that is the process on that one. So it is for, let me get this to go back the way I wanted it to. There we go. So it would be the process, the policy by which programs are developed, presented, that sort of thing, the information needed. To a degree, it may also, you may also have the programs actually approved in your curriculum committee or wherever it may be. Although again, any educational program development is also going to have an economic aspect to it that I would certainly think that one's going to be a mutually agree in most places, because it's hard for me to just imagine that the administration is just going to say, and that the board is going to say, yes, the faculty just decided this, because there's so much of an economic impact with putting a new program in place. So, but I think it would be certainly the process by which new programs are developed, presented, possibly at least to a given degree, the approval of those programs as well, I would think under that one. So. And then there's the +1. Other academic and professional matters is mutually agreed upon by the governing board and the academic senate. And my line all over the state on this is, do you actually have outlined how you decide this? Okay, because it's not only possible, it's fairly common that your academic senate says this is an academic and professional matter, and your administration says, no, this is operational. And so how do you make that decision? I mean, that's, and again, to me, having an actual process written out for when you have disagreement on what's a +1 issue, how are you going to resolve that? Most colleges, if they have anything at all, it's pretty fluffy. And I'm always encouraging people, make it less fluffy, have an actual process. To me, that would solve a lot of problems if you had a real process to go through when that debate comes up, because frankly, it comes up a lot. So, but those, Beth, I hope that helps, Beth. Those are the actual definitions. Now, again, obviously there's some interpretation within those, but those are the actual definitions for what are listed as academic and professional matters. So I hope that's helpful for you on that.
Hey, David, can I just,
yes,
just 2 points?
Mm-hmm.
One is academic and professional matters. That phrase is purposefully ambiguous, and we don't want the legislature to define that. And I would agree with David, what you said, locally creating a process for how to define and how to decide would be encouraged. I keep forgetting the second point, so they must not have been very important, as Maxwell Smart would say. So keep going.
Okay. So yeah, and I think this is kind of just laying out, where you fall on a lot of these things, whether you're primarily relying or so. Kind of looked at your board policy on this. You've got a lot of them that are mutual agree, but certain of the things, and I think curriculum in most places is probably primarily rely. Whereas I would certainly think institutional planning and budget development, most places are going to be mutually agree, but some places do have all 10 on one or all 10 on the other. Most places it's a split, but it might be 2 and 8 or 5 and 5. So, Guire, please go ahead.
Oh, thank you. So I'm going to take a couple steps back a little bit, just because it's been percolating in my mind and thinking about what we faced as an institution. I'm thinking about the word transparency, which is something that's talked a lot about. And I'd like to hear more thoughts on that. I would just say, you talked about trust and there's a lot of individual responsibility there, but looking beyond individual responsibility, how do you see transparency in decision-making? How can that be structurally built locally so that it's not just an individual responsibility to build trust, but we actually build it into our, BPs and APs, our decision-making processes. That's kind of what, when I think about some of the structural issues we're facing, how can we address this structurally? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. I don't think it's an easy question to answer, but it certainly makes sense. And I guess my general answer would be make the transparency the default. I mean, whether it's debating, okay, meetings happening, okay, do you have to have the meeting open? Do you have to have people able to come to the meeting? There are reasons sometimes for meetings that can't be held openly. But I think to me, the default should be, yes, invite people in, unless there's a reason not to. The same thing, there are decisions that involve personnel issues that you can't always give the entire reason for. I mean, that's a reality. But unless you've got reasons not to, give people the reasons. So to me, it would be the more that you possibly can, the default should be that tell people why things are happening, let people observe them, publish the information to people. And again, that's not a 100% thing because there are reasons sometimes that you can't, and completely legitimate reasons, legally, structurally, very different things. But whenever you can, to build in kind of as a principle to your processes that this meeting, will be something that's announced. This meeting will be something with agenda published. This meeting is something that people will be invited to. Again, the most that you can, because it's not going to be 100%. But the most that you can do that, I think that would encourage the transparency and give people who are interested the opportunity to really observe and see what's going on. So, Larry, do you have anything additional?
Well, just also, you probably have many committees with multiple constituencies at the committees. And if each committee is completely distinct in terms of the processes of the decision-making and the communicating out, I mean, what happens a lot, right, is someone's a representative of a particular group and they don't report out or don't do a very good job reporting out, and there are no minutes. And so the people who weren't able to go, and then rumors. And so without over bureaucratizing, which I don't, there's no bright line when it's, overly standardized and over bureaucratized versus too informal. But if you have many committees, there should be at least some level of expectation of some degree of consistency in terms of decision-making processes, reporting out, and what constitutes transparency. What's the minimal level of transparency from committee X in terms of reporting out, because they have multiple constituencies of the college that are involved.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So, okay.
Hey, David, I remembered what.
Okay, go ahead.
The other point was just in terms of if everything is an academic and professional matter. We talked about this before, but if everything is identified as an academic professional matter, or if everything is identified by the administration as operational, number one, it's understood as people are being disingenuous. And number two, it trivializes the real academic and professional matters that should be first and foremost under the purview of faculty expertise in terms of recommendations. And similarly with operational issues, we just risk trivializing things when your goal is, I'm going to make everything an operational issue. I'm going to make everything an academic and professional matter. It trivializes the reality, and then it erodes trust So that is a problem, but there is ambiguity in both cases.
And it's got to be an honest conversation. I completely agree, Larry. And yeah, whether it's between operational or academic and professional matters, again, whether it's between Senate versus union, whatever, again, my very strong belief is you get what you're willing to give, and that you're not going to get trust that, yeah, I mean, we talked a lot about trust here. You're not going to get trust if you're not willing to give trust. You're not going to get trustworthy people if you're not willing to be trustworthy. I don't think that's me being idealistic. I think that's realistic. I think it's human nature. I mean, you know, nobody's, again, you're not going to get something back from somebody if you're not willing to give it. So I think that's an important principle on this for everybody to keep in mind. So again, important to remember that so the 10+1 are the legally defined academic and professional matters. Those are not the entirety of academic senate roles. Other parts of Ed Code, minimum qualifications, faculty hiring, administrative retreat rights, also mention conversations with the Senate. So the 10+1 is not a limiting thing. It's probably the main thing, but there are other roles as well. Curriculum committee is established with mutual agreement with the Senate. Appointments to college bodies. This one is specifically on faculty, but it really should be appropriate to all constituencies. The appointment of faculty members to serve on college and district committees, task forces, or other groups. I think that's as inclusive as you can get. Committees, task forces, and other groups. I once had an administrator arguing, yeah, but it's a team. I don't care. It says district committees, task forces, and other groups, you know, dealing with academic and professional matters shall be made after consultation with the CEO by the academic senate. The union also has a right to make appointments as negotiated into the contract. Okay. But outside, the principle there is you pick your own representatives, okay, that the Senate decides outside of union appointments. The Senate decides which faculty are going to be representing the faculty on groups dealing with academic and professional matters. And again, that principle should apply for staff, for students, for whoever it is, that if you're not the one picking your representatives, then somebody's handpicking them and they may not really be representing you. So I think that to me is a really important aspect of Title V. And again, not just for faculty, but it really should apply for everyone. So, working with unions, which again, we've talked a little bit about, decision-making policies can't detract. So we can't detract from negotiated agreements. So yeah, you get something into the contract that's a little, you know, kind of overrides in a lot of cases. In some cases, there can be some conflict and you've got to talk about and try to work that out because Title V does have the force of law as well. But this does say that you can't create policies that overwhelm what the contract says. So and then there are areas where, okay, it says that senates and bargaining units can work together. And there are areas where it specifically says work together. Okay, faculty evaluation, you brought up earlier. The language in Ed Code is that the bargaining unit shall consult with the academic senate prior to entering into bargaining on faculty evaluations, tenure, seniority. Okay. Now, the basement on that is the union consults with the Senate before entering negotiations. I think both sides have got to be realistic. On the one hand, that doesn't mean the union talks to the Senate and then goes and does whatever it wants to. That would kind of be not following with the spirit on this. On the other hand, the Senate has to understand that when you're at the bargaining table, you can't always turn around and go back and say, we've got to go check and see if this is okay with the Senate. I mean, so, but that's again, the reason for the ongoing discussion between the Senate and the union so that you have a common understanding. So the union's going to know up front, is this something that's really going to go against the Senate's principles or where the Senate is going on this while they're at the bargaining table? If that's an ongoing conversation rather than a one-off before you go into negotiations, I think it's a lot more effective. And I think, again, that principle probably applies on a lot of things. And then again, the staff roles language is not very extensive. This is basically it. That staff will participate effectively in things that affect them. Most things affect staff, as far as I'm concerned. I have trouble thinking. I could probably think of a couple if I tried hard enough, but most things affect staff. So again, that idea of inclusion, and then the students, similar language here for students. to what it says on staff. But it does give a list for students of these are the areas specifically. So what the Student Senate calls the 9+1. But you notice there's overlap, grading policies, curriculum development. There's overlap with the Academic Senate's 10+1, but it's not the same role. This is to be consulted to participate effectively. It's not primarily rely or mutually agree. So there's overlap and you want the student input, but the decision-making process doesn't make everybody an equal voice necessarily. That doesn't mean that all voices shouldn't be respected and listened to. So a few of the kind of final things on this. Again, the board has the final say. We've covered that. Oops. So Larry, I was kind of flying through slides to try to get us, closer to the end on this. Was there anything that I skipped over that you might want to?
No, because I was typing something in the chat, so I was glad you were continuing. So
okay. Okay. So, and one question that comes up on this is, in terms of legal compelling, again, education code is legislation. It's passed by the legislature, it's law. Education code deputizes the Board of Governors to enact Title V, making Title V have the force of law. So yeah, these aren't optional. These are legal requirements. But when we work on these at the state level, we generally try to write them as broadly as we can so that you have the room locally to interpret them and implement them in the ways that work best for your college and for your community. So we had several more scenarios to go through, like that first one that we did. We've also got about 3 minutes, according to my clock, before we're actually supposed to finish. So it's not that I'm in a hurry, but I do want to respect people's time. So maybe it's better first just to ask if there are any questions, anything else that anybody wanted to raise here. Okay. Again, I'm not certain. We had several of the different scenarios. This one dealing with the implementation of the guided pathways framework. This is another one of the new ones. And talking about appointments to bodies on this one. This one talks about, so the essence of this one is education code and Title V both say consult with the Academic Senate. It does not say consult with faculty. So talking to your department chairs is not the same thing as talking to the Academic Senate. Talking to some committee is not the same thing as talking. Again, the Senate should be listening to all of those people and maybe even making appointments to those committees. But in the end, if it says consult collegially or primarily rely, it's the Senate, not faculty in general. So, and then let's see, this one was talking a little bit about staff development and the idea, again, so this one is dealing with the idea of, okay, so policies for professional development is one of the 10+1. That doesn't mean you couldn't have an overall professional development committee. Okay. Some colleges do, rather than a separate one for faculty. You could still set that up in such a way that things that are specifically faculty things still end up going to the Senate in whatever kind of way. So again, sometimes there are things, again, on the other hand, having an overall committee, a lot of things that affect faculty affect staff too. So you want to, maybe there's a reason for having some things combined. So those are just a couple of additional examples of some of these scenarios, and we can publish the PowerPoint for you, send it to you to be published, and you can look through those on your own. Larry, I think we're about at the end. Any last comments that you want to throw out?
it's always if there are any questions. Just appreciate everybody taking this time. These are inevitably unsatisfying or unsatisfactory. Maybe they're unsatisfying too. We do what we can in 2 hours, but comes back to the local college, and I'm sure that you do confer with your colleagues at other colleges to see if they have processes or means by which they try to work through these issues. I think that's to be encouraged. And if you want to ask us, beyond today, we'll do the best that we can to try to help. So, question.
Yeah, sure.
Yes, I believe some of us filled out a survey in advance where some of us, may have put some, really put time into that.
Mhm.
I'm just wondering what happened to that survey? Where does that information go? How does it help us?
Yeah, it goes to us, and Larry and I both received the responses to that survey, and we actually talked about it a day or so ago. And it kind of just helps us to inform. We sometimes will choose specific scenarios to include that we think might be, useful for the college based on that input. Or these are some of the issues that we specifically want to cover. Again, we have to be a little circumspect with it because we don't want to come in trying to go, okay, we can solve your problems and this is what you should do. So we try to be a little careful with it. But the surveys did go to us. We did read them, and we hope that it actually helped to prepare us a little bit for what some of the questions might be, and for some of the things that we might need to talk about. That's kind of the purpose behind it and where it comes from.
Okay,
And-
just a quick follow-up on that. I mean, not that we'd want you to share any identifying information, but if you came away from that with any sense of themes of those people who filled it out, I think that would be interesting for you to share with us.
Okay. Larry, any thought or?
Well, so the good news was that there were a lot of surveys, there were a lot of responses and a lot of very thoughtful responses. And so that was very helpful for us, recognizing that this is a sort of a 2-hour stage one, phase one. There's no way we could have even tried to respond directly to each of them. We also want to recognize the anonymity or respect the anonymity of people. Sometimes people will, we don't know whether they want us to bring this up, even if we don't identify them, because sometimes people feel like, well, if you bring up a certain issue, everyone knows I've been talking about that for 5 years. But in terms of themes, some we see, I would say, at every institution. I've not read one set of surveys where it didn't say this morale has never been lower in the history of the college. Like it's always it's always the worst than it's ever been. And concerns about transparency. Here, something that stood out to me that I don't always see was there were some comments about many committees and perhaps overlap of committees, and just trying to sort of clarify and analyze the committee structure and try to figure out, is this the best committee structure we have to create a collegial consultation? David, what else?
Yeah, I think, well, that was definitely one. And again, in terms of our planning, that's what that's for. So yes, we saw that comment on the committees, and that was why we specifically brought up the idea of having specific charges, having written charges and memberships for the committees, because it's very easy when you don't have that for committees to start saying, let's do this too. And then you get multiple committees working on the same thing in various different ways, and you get confusion and overlap and sometimes conflict. So yes, and I think to me, the biggest thing that I saw was, and I don't think this is just about you, again, as Larry said, a lot of these things are pretty consistent where we see in most places. A lot of people talking about not being listened to in all kinds of different ways. The Senate and the union not listening, the Senate not listening to others, the college president not listening to people, the staff not being listened to. And I think that was the reason for that discussion of trust and that discussion of transparency and communication, is because that, I don't think it was any one thing. I think it was kind of pervasive overall, just this sense of we need better communication and we need people to listen to each other more. And again, there were all kinds of different ways it was said, But that was, in terms of themes, that was the one that stood out to me the most here, was just a feeling. Whether it's true or not, I'm not at Santa Barbara. Sometimes I wish I was, but I'm not. So I can't say the accuracy of it, but at least a perception on some parts that nobody's really listening to anybody. And I think that's the reason for the very good discussion I thought that we were having on truth and on trust, I'm sorry, and on transparency and communication. So, Rayanne? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to kind of take what Guire just said and back to something Danielle, another questioner or comment brought up earlier, and comment on what Larry said. So I heard you say that you typically you see, you know, a comment or a theme coming through on these surveys is that morale has never been so low. And I can totally appreciate that, especially because it's like, I don't think any college would ask for a tech assist when things are going good, right? So I think that makes sense. And I think that that's a thing to kind of say, okay, we're hearing this one a lot. But if I could just context maybe for Santa Barbara City College and where we're coming from with that, it's that the DEI survey or campus climate survey, we number things depending on what, you know, what space we're in and who's referring to it, that we, in the spring of 2019, when we had interim president, Dr. Helen Benjamin with us, we had an outside consulting company, and I believe they were from the East Coast, although the details kind of escape me. Ones that handled that survey on our behalf. And part of that service was come back to the college. Okay, these things we saw, here's the summary, here's advice. At a time when they were sharing out that information, this consulting company who conducts these surveys a lot told us they have never seen survey results that were so low. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is when we're saying this in a survey to you all, when we're bringing you in for help on our campus and looking for that outside expertise, we have, let's say, confirmed, quantifiable information that our morale is particularly low. So there is something unique happening here, and and that's why I'm so anxious for, like, what is the way forward? How do we start listening to each other? How do we stir up what we've been doing so that we can make some ground on this? Part of this being included in our accreditation standard for a self-improvement plan was to make headway on those survey results. And so I'm just wondering, in your last few minutes, what's your parting wisdom to all of us to move forward?
Yeah, so I don't know if it's parting wisdom, but I do want to say my goal was not to trivialize it. My goal, which maybe was, you know, not wise or not, was that it's not uncommon, and I'm not trying to trivialize it. I guess what I'm saying is this is enormously difficult work. This is an incredibly difficult time. So, you know, not trying to trivialize it, but just trying to recognize that, especially in the last year, for all of the circumstances, even, you know, beyond the college, in fact, this is particularly fraught time. So in terms of parting ways, parting wisdom, I don't know if it's wisdom, but a couple of things I would just say that based on, I mean, you have a lot of incredibly smart people who are trying to do really important work. And so that's abundantly clear. And I'm not just saying that because it sounds good, it's just true. And you know, this is a fraught time in terms of race. You know, just politically, it's a very difficult time. Then we have the pandemic, and then it's just a very difficult time. So I guess one is just coming back to that, trying to work on the relationships and recognizing that to the extent people are impugning motives, that it's going to be hard to move forward. At the same time, recognizing that, you know what, sometimes you also have to just put in your back pocket that, you know what, this is somebody that I just don't think I'm going to be able to work with constructively. So I need to lean on other people and work with other colleagues and try to figure this out. That, you know, being realistic. Maybe it's cliched, but at the end of the day, it is about the students and the communities that you serve, but it's also about one another. And you know, Santa Barbara City College is an amazing place. So even though it might feel terrible, you know, you're in a place and at an institution that is so important, not just Santa Barbara, but for the entire state. So I can't in a couple of minutes, but I think some of the things that we tried to point to, having processes and structures that are not just about the people who are currently in roles, and think about 10 years, 15, 20 years down the road, what do you have in place that helps things? At the same time, what can you do to try to work to develop and nurture relationships with one another, and provide opportunities for different leaders to rise to the occasion?
Yeah, and thank you, Larry. And I agree, number one, would second everything that Larry just said. And to follow just a little bit further with one last point on, you know, you made the comment of, you know, if there's somebody that, you know, you may have a little bit of a difficult relationship with, maybe you decide to lean on others. And I think that's more broadly, even than just in difficult relationships. I think that's an important thing. One of the things that I learned very quickly as State Academic Senate President was how much I couldn't do, and that there were other people around who sometimes knew more than I did on stuff. And I think that's an important thing for any leader. I am in no way talking about you specifically or personally, Rayanne. I think for everybody, for your Senate leadership, not just the president, but the entire Senate leadership, for your union leadership, for your administration, for all of your leadership, the willingness to let other people do things and to acknowledge that sometimes there are other people who know more than you do, let them do it. Okay, and that kind of inclusion, number one, I think would promote trust, because again, it's very easy to complain about things that have low morale when you're looking at it from the outside rather than being involved. So the more people you can pull in, the better. But again, you got to give people the opportunities. If you know, we saw the comment in those surveys about not having the same people on all committees, right? Understand that. And that's prevalent all over the state. It's everywhere. 10% of the faculty do 90% of the work. That's it. But if you keep doing it, people will let you keep doing it too. So you've got to be willing to step aside and say, we need somebody else to do this. Okay, we're not going to put the same person in there over and over again. Maybe in some cases, that might even involve creating term limits, but that's a discussion to have in some places, because you also want to appreciate the experience of people and make certain that those voices are included. But you've got to be willing to step aside. And again, I've had this discussion with people all over the state. Why are you still Senate President? Well, there's nobody else to do it. You tell them you're not going to do it and somebody else will step forward. But as long as they can keep telling you you're the only one who can do it, then they'll let you keep doing it. Okay. And they'll keep feeding your ego to tell you that you're the only one who can do it. So again, I think that's important.
That's true.
For the point that was raised about inclusion, about getting more people involved. But I think also the more people who are involved, the more that you address those trust issues and those communication issues, because again, it's easier to criticize something from the outside than when you're actually involved. So I think that's something very important to think about. And again, being willing, the leadership has got to be willing to let other people lead too. And so just, again, that's not saying anything specific about anything that I know going on at Santa Barbara, because I don't. It's just a general observation that I see all over the place on that. And I think,
Are we at the end of our time?
I think we are, yes.
Yeah.
I think we're past. I'm going to do just a couple of knitting things and a reminder out to our group. Larry and David both said something about you may feel unsatisfied with the extent of how far we were able to get in 2 hours. But if you flip that around, you can think how important, how complex is this conversation that 2 hours with 2 experts and the rest of us wasn't yet enough. So this is the very first step in the work for Standard 4A, right? It was a moment to recalibrate some of our expectations and our understanding about the technical pieces behind this work that have to do with the whole state, not just us. And then our next step is to move into this conversation at a local level, to have an examination about how our committee structure and our governance works. Are there places in there for refinement? How are we shaping charges, committee membership, term limits, term time? How are we doing all of those things? And how are we caring? One of our big challenges isn't that we're transparent and keeping secrets at a college where we actually need information to go out. It's how hard it is to communicate out, especially if we have slightly redundant or too many committees or there isn't enough time. So that idea about making our time be the most effective when we are together, I think also reinforces our areas of respect and trust. So we developed with the Standard 4A roadmap for moving forward. It's not particularly prescriptive about the outcomes, but we put in front of us as a college some steps to take to start moving through this work. And our very first step was to ask for this technical assist. Down the road, we may want to ask for a different kind of technical assistance. We could bring folks back in from the league and the state senate to help with a more refined conversation. So there are lots of opportunities for us to do more with what we have here. So this is, step one on doing some really meaningful long-term work. And on behalf of the college, I can't thank you both enough. And for Ray to get this set up for us and to get the ball rolling, for the Standard 4A writing team, yay, good work on getting us going. Ray, you want to throw in some closing words?
Think so? I'm good. Thanks everyone for your time today. Chelsea's sharing, respectfully, we need people of color and folks with other marginalized identities leading these dialogues. Thanks for that, Chelsea. And thanks for always bringing us back to that. That's an important thing to center. But yeah, as you can hear, my house is getting busy again. So I'm going to go back to getting my hair done. David and Larry, thank you so much for your time today. And thank you for everyone that steered the conversations with your comments and questions. It's really appreciated.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.